Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
We say no to ICE and fear. Immigrants are welcome here. We say no to ICE and fear. Immigrants are welcome here.
Hundreds of people in Biddeford, Maine, taking to the streets after immigration and customs enforcement agents fatally shot a man there on Monday. The Department of Homeland Security says the officers were fearing for public safety when a vehicle attempted to flee. But Maine's Democratic Congresswoman Shelley Pingree says it was a botched operation.
By all accounts, he was the wrong man, not the person that ICE had been targeting. He was headed off to work, lived very close nearby, and there was an ICE operation going on looking for someone else, but he was in the car. And by all accounts, shortly after the shooting, his wife and 3-year-old daughter in her bluey pajamas with a pink backpack were also on the scene. So they witnessed seeing their father's dead body.
3 people have died in the past week after encounters with ICE. In Florida, a 28-year-old man died on Tuesday morning after he fled from agents and was hit by a truck. And in Houston, Texas, a 52-year-old Mexican man was fatally shot by agents at a traffic stop. The CBC's Washington correspondent Katie Nicholson joins us now. Katie, good morning.
Good morning.
We heard a little bit there from the Congresswoman about what happened in May, but what more do we know?
It appears to be an intersection of 2 paths here. It's just somebody trying to go to work and an ICE operation that went wrong. So we know that ICE was conducting this operation. It was around 7 a.m. in this small town. It's about 30 kilometers south of Portland. This was just as Joan Sebastian Guerrero was leaving for work. He's a Colombian man, 26 years old. What we've heard is that he has a social security number, that he was just pulling away in his white Kia slowly. Then there are videos that have emerged of ICE agents alongside that car reaching for the door. And there's verified video of ICE opening fire that has not yet emerged. But there are other videos that sort of capture the sound of those shots, 5 in total. There are multiple bullet holes you can see in the windshield of the car. The Bangor Daily News, they have a video of Mr. Guerrero, his body being pulled from the car by agents. You can see that his body is limp and they handcuff him. And witnesses in the neighborhood, they expressed horror to reporters in the immediate aftermath. They described Guerrero's wife at the scene absolutely gutted and traumatized, with their 3-year-old still in her bluey pajamas there as well. Now, as you noted, DHS, they said that they were conducting this targeted surveillance, or as they put it, that they were going after, and this is their words, an illegal alien with a final removal order. And they thought at the last known address of this individual, and they say that an illegal alien departed the residence in a vehicle, so they are characterizing him as an illegal alien. ICE, they say, then attempted to conduct a vehicle stop, and then they say that the vehicle attempted to flee, and that the officer was fearing for public safety, and that's why he discharged his weapon. But that response, Pia, it's what's fueled the outrage in the community, in particular for what that statement did not say, which was that the officer's life was in immediate danger, which could justify use of deadly force. And so that has also kicked off all of this protest that we have seen in Maine.
Okay, and so Katie, there seem to be conflicting reports. Homeland Security describing Joan Sebastian Guerrero as an illegal alien. He is from Colombia, but he was authorized to work in the United States. Yes?
Yeah. So this is what immigration advocates immediately stepped up with information that he was on his way to work. He had a social security number. He was allowed to work. And what we heard from Senator Angus King, who was trying to get to the bottom of this, going directly to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Markwayne Mullen, he says he was told this man was not the target of this operation. He worked as a food delivery driver. Local restaurants knew him. They described Guerrero as the kind of person who always asked how you were doing and if you needed anything. And he was, interestingly enough, also so deeply affected by the killing of Renee Good last January in Minneapolis. You remember she was shot by ICE agents as she was in her car. And basically, Guerrero had posted a response to this on his personal Facebook page at the time and saying, sadly, Here, you get paid for killing a person.
And Katie, as I mentioned, he was not the only person killed by ICE agents this week. There are reports since those killings that ICE agents have been directed, for the most part, to halt all traffic stops, and there are plans to equip each ICE team with an agent wearing a body camera. Tell us more about that.
Right. So look, body-worn cameras, this is a Biden-era thing. They were supposed to be worn by all federal employees or federal officers. This was something they brought in for police reform. When Trump came into office, by executive order, he got rid of that rule. But then, after what we saw in Minneapolis, the killings of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, back in February, DHS said, okay, everybody's going to wear body-worn cameras from now on. But that has been slow. The uptake has been slow. Currently, only half of people have these cameras, and the two shootings that we have seen this week, right, the one in Houston and the one in Maine, the officers were not wearing body-worn cameras. So what has happened is now DHS says in the next 60 days, everybody is going to have to wear these body-worn cameras.
Except to say, Katie, that the American president spoke out this morning on social media, and he has something to say about this.
He's also has something to say about the traffic stops as well. So this process of having a traffic stop, we heard from DHS yesterday. They were going to temporarily suspend this because this is what happened in these two incidents. And we also heard from, I guess, Tom Homan, the czar, that this is just going to be a very temporary measure. But Trump came out today on Truth Social kind of refuting this and saying essentially that the people of ICE, the traffic stop, this is one of our important fighting tools. We cannot get rid of it. Once we do, we're playing right into the criminals' hands, he wrote. And he goes on about radical left Democrats would like to see this done. It won't happen on my watch. He says, ICE, be judicious, fair, and smart, and go back and do your very important job. He said, keep those crime stats records coming, which also speaks to why this is why we're seeing these numbers jump right now, right? This is about statistics to him right now.
And Katie, we are just a few months before U.S. midterm elections, and we know sometimes politics intersect with these kinds of issues. We're seeing what seems like sort of a ramping up of ICE, but where do the politics intersect with the timing of all this?
Yeah, so think about all the bad PR they got after what happened in Minneapolis. And you see Secretary Noem sort of is done away with. She leaves. She wears it. You see Greg Bavino, the guy who was walking around his military peacoat, the border guy. He gets there. They get rid of him. These are the people that were the face of that initial crackdown. But that crackdown never went away. It was kind of quiet under the surface, but this is something that is still very important to the administration. It's just been quieter. DHS is one of the most well-funded parts of the government right now. They have resources, and there's still this push within the administration. So just in the last month, over 5 days in June, there were about 10,000 arrests in a series of sweeps. This is something that is still very important to the Trump administration. And if you look at their feed on X today, they're not backing down here. They are touting a lot of their arrests of people they say are very serious offenders with illegal status, as opposed to sort of addressing some of the larger questions here about the incident in Florida, the incident in Houston, the incident in Maine, where you're hearing like the DA in Houston complaining because he's not getting information that he wants from federal authorities to conduct an investigation as to what happened there at that traffic stop shooting.
Okay, Katie, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Katie Nicholson is the CBC's Washington correspondent. Peter Mina is an attorney who spent nearly a decade working at ICE, followed by another 6 years as a deputy officer for civil rights and civil liberties at the Department of Homeland Security. He is now a civil rights lawyer and the founder and principal of the Mina firm in Washington, D.C. Peter, good morning to you.
Good morning, Pia.
Given your vast experience at both ICE and the DHS, what stands out to you about these two deadly shootings in Houston and Maine?
Well, I think, Pia, unfortunately, this is just yet another indicator of how this administration has really devalued the human life of people attempting to enter this country. And I think what we see is, you heard about the push for higher arrest numbers. That's been the administration's signature issue almost from the beginning prior to his first term. And so that is going to be the overriding goal and mission almost above all else. I mean, even in the wake of, these killings, you're seeing, the president come out and say, no, we need to keep doing it, because they're trying to send a very clear message, I think.
Senator Angus King of Maine said he'd spoken with Homeland Security Secretary, who confirmed to him that the 26-year-old Colombian man, Guerrero, who was shot in Maine, was not the person ICE officers were targeting. There's similar reporting coming out of Houston. What does this suggest to you or tell you, Peter, about how people are being profiled in the United States?
Well, I think, this goes back to there's a couple of factors at play. One, this goes back to the opinion from the Supreme Court last year by Justice Kavanaugh that basically says, if you're brown at home and at Home Depot, and I'm certainly oversimplifying a little bit, but, you could be, stopped by ICE and questioned about your status. And, that has been, very inconsistent with not only, constitutional principles, but even the department's own policies. And so I think now what you're also seeing is, and this is not, new necessarily, it's kind of gone back and forth, this idea that, okay, if I'm pursuing a target and I happen to encounter someone that is also without status, I can certainly go ahead and, detain or question that person. But what's happening here, it seems, is there is, again, this push for thousands and thousands of arrest numbers per day. And I think, I think that may be driving, maybe a less rigorous, process of determining who actually the target is. And then I think the other thing, too, is I understand the reporting, this was a new recruit. Mm-hmm. And so, what we've seen is that there's been a gutting of the, standards for hiring, as well as a gutting of training. And unfortunately, it's not just putting the public at risk, but it's also putting ICE officers at risk. They're being set up to fail. And of course they are, they're making decisions that, we look back and we say, look, it's costing lives.
Can I ask you, when you worked at ICE, what was your training like?
Sure. So just to be clear, I was not a law enforcement officer, nor was I, necessarily operational. I was actually the employment lawyer for ICE, or I ran their labor and employment law division. And so, where I, sort of intersected with this was, I advised my clients on the personnel issues, and, that may include misconduct. It may include selection processes. And so you get to learn the business. But I think, getting back to questions of accountability, even with body-worn cameras, the question is going to be, okay, how are you going to use that footage? Is there going to be a full and fair investigation? Either way, we shouldn't be making assumptions. We should get to the facts. But the question is, and it seems very apparent over the last 2 years, that's not the point here. The point is deterrence and intimidation and fear.
I'm glad you brought up investigation, because officials in both states are calling for independent investigations into what happened in these individual cases. How likely do you think that is?
I mean, I think it all gets to the definition of the word independence. And this strikes, a very direct chord for me, because I oversaw the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties at the very end, before our office was eliminated. And we would have been investigating, these incidences. And now, there's a shell, but we basically don't exist. And then, so you're left with offices of professional responsibility, or as other people might, refer to them, offices of internal affairs at ICE, or, and CBP, to the extent that there's a CBP officer or agent involved, doing these investigations. And look, there are a lot of good people there, but I really wonder, whether they have the freedom to do their job. And so it really gets into this question of, how independent is independent? Even if you were to go to DOJ, I don't have confidence anymore. And they seem very reticent up until, I think recently I saw a report where, federal law enforcement was actually starting to share some information, with state and locals. But, again, they're trying to keep the information close so they can maintain a narrative. So
how do you understand the response to these killings in terms of they now say that at least one agent will be wearing a body camera, that the traffic stops should be halted for the most part? What is that telling you about agency accountability and what we might see going forward?
Well, I mean, again, I think this gets back to, consistency and application of that policy. I mean, I can tell you when I was at the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, we did investigations of vehicular pursuits all the time, and these traffic stops, because they can be very dangerous for all people involved. And as I think, people have reported, and there was discussion earlier in the program, look, there are absolutely times where, unfortunately, deadly force has to be used, but the force has to be objectively reasonable. And, based on what we're seeing, absent more facts, I just don't see how you get there. And so, even with the body cam footage, the question becomes, are you going to use those to use that footage to conduct a real investigation? And based on those findings, have some measure of accountability, discipline. I mean, there are people involved that have to make those decisions. It's not just a matter of saying, well, John Doe had a body camera on. And I think the other thing too, that, even with the criticisms of, we, don't need to do this or what have you, it's actually a tool to protect officers as well. Because if you're doing things the right way, that footage should back you up.
Peter, as Katie was saying, the ICE enforcement over the last number of years, it's been pretty consistent. They've been ramping up at certain points in times, and it becomes news when there are these tragic deaths. But we know that there has been a lot of fear in immigrant communities, in Black and Brown communities. Talk to me about where that is now, some couple years into this real big push by ICE.
Well, I mean, I think it probably hasn't been higher. I mean, to me, it seems as though that, that's the point. The point is to engender fear in Black and Brown communities. It's to engender, the belief that you shouldn't come here. And so we're going to make it as difficult and terror-filled as we can. So whether that is on the streets, or it's in detention facilities, or, through these processes of, just deporting people to, third countries where there are no ties and where there continues to be great danger. It is a presumption that anyone, especially anyone that's Black and Brown, that's attempting to enter this country, is either, perpetuating some kind of fraud because they couldn't possibly be actually seeking asylum, or, they're stealing our jobs. There's a threat. I mean, that is the whole ethos around this immigration enforcement regime, unfortunately.
I only have about a minute left with you, but I want to ask you this to end our conversation. Mexico says it will file legal complaints against the U.S. because of the number of deaths of Mexicans in ICE custody, including the deadly shooting in Houston last week. What impact might an action like this, that sort of international pressure, have on both the agency and the White House?
Unfortunately, I don't think much. I mean, because again, it seems as though this administration is, not particularly concerned about its reputation in the world. And it seems as though this is, again, the signature issue. It's the whole reason, I think, why, many folks are there. And I think what is unfortunate in the long term is I think it makes this nation less secure, and, it has devastated public trust. And so, while, again, the Homeland Security mission is an important one, it's going to take years to rebuild it and to rebuild the public's confidence, if it can be rebuilt.
Peter, it's been good to get your perspective this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pia.
Peter Mina is a civil rights attorney who spent nearly a decade working at ICE.
You've been listening to The Current podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.